Welcome to the debate here on the Global WarWatch Network. Is Iran about to become the dominant force in the Red Sea? Their unprecedented naval doctrine just dropped, and honestly, it's sending some serious shockwaves through international relations. We're going to examine closely what this strategic pivot truly entails and the critical geopolitical implications it holds for really every nation with a stake in the region. So today we're dissecting a really critical question. Does Iran's evolving Red Sea strategy signal an assertive, maybe even expansionist drive for regional dominance? Or is it fundamentally more of a defensive, security-maximizing response to what they perceive as external threats? I'll be arguing that Iran's actions reflect a deliberate and assertive push for regional dominance, leveraging, quite advanced asymmetric capabilities to project power far beyond its traditional borders.
And I'll be presenting the, let's say, contrasting view that Iran's strategy in the Red Sea is primarily defensive. It's meticulously focused on deterrence, mitigating serious threats they see, and, frankly, a strategic repositioning within an incredibly volatile geopolitical landscape. It's much more about survival and securing its interests, not necessarily outright conquest or dominance.
Okay, well, to begin, I think it's fairly clear that Iran harbors significant ambitions for regional hegemony in the Red Sea. Their approach isn't subtle. It's really a multifaceted push designed to enhance their influence, bolster their economic prospects, and definitely increase geopolitical leverage, all while pressuring rivals in this absolutely crucial maritime corridor. You just have to consider the statements from senior Iranian military advisors. General Yahya Rahim Safavi, back in March 2024, explicitly emphasized Iran's intention to increase its strategic depth by an astounding 5,000 kilometers, specifically targeting the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. Now, this isn't just about protecting their coastline, right? It's about projecting power and influence over, vast distances. These ambitious goals are, I believe, deeply rooted in Iran's long-standing foreign policy, which includes spreading the Islamic Revolution and, fundamentally, challenging the state of Israel. These are hardly modest defensive aspirations. They really sound like declarations of an intent to reshape regional power dynamics. Furthermore, Iran hasn't just, talked the talk. They've developed and significantly proliferated advanced asymmetric naval capabilities that undeniably support this assertive stance. We're talking about sophisticated modular anti-ship ballistic missiles, ASBMs, like the Fatah 110 derivatives. Some are known by the Houthis as Tankil and Bahar el-Armor. These are highly potent guided missiles specifically designed to strike ships. They offer varying ranges and warheads, and crucially, they're cheaper and much easier to hide than large conventional naval assets. This makes them, ideal for a strategy focused on surprise and overwhelming force. Iran has also shown considerable ingenuity in reverse engineering Russian K-55 cruise missiles into low-cost, simplified versions, giving them long-range anti-ship and land attack capabilities. And we've seen the real-world effectiveness of their Shahed one-way attack drones against vessels, even at extreme ranges, posing a very serious threat, especially to unarmed merchant vessels. This innovation even extends further. They've converted cargo ships, like the C-110-4 Shahed Mahdavi, into drone and ballistic missile carriers, capable of launching from standard shipping containers. This dramatically expands their operational range and their potential for, frankly, devastating surprise attacks almost anywhere in the region. And finally, Iran's reliance on proxy warfare, particularly through the Houthis in Yemen, serves as a direct extension of its naval power and its regional ambitions. Iran's comprehensive support, providing critical intelligence, advanced missile and drone technologies, extensive training, this enables Houthi operations to project influence directly onto the southern Red Sea approaches without requiring Iran to deploy large, overt conventional forces. The Houthi attacks on merchant ships and even warships, often targeting these so-called dark ships that hide their identity, have been systematic and incredibly impactful. They've disrupted global shipping lanes, sent insurance costs skyrocketing, and effectively pressured international powers. This isn't just a defensive shield, it's a strategic maneuver creating what some call a second Strait of Hormuz at Bab-el-Mandeb, demonstrating Iran's capacity to choke off vital global trade routes. These actions seem clearly like tools of coercion and dominance, designed to project power and exert control.
Mm-hmm. I see your points, but I come at this from a fundamentally different perspective. While the capabilities you describe are certainly real and quite concerning, I believe Iran's Red Sea policy is rooted much more in defensive realism. It's aimed at safeguarding its interests by forestalling what it genuinely perceives as significant external threats and deterring hostile coalitions. We really can't ignore the context here, the ongoing effects of the US-led maximum pressure campaign, the evolving Saudi Emirati security framework, and of course, Israel's actions across the region. For Tehran, I suspect this isn't primarily about seeking outright hegemony. It's about national survival and maintaining its security in a very tough neighborhood.
This approach aligns almost perfectly with defensive realism, the school of thought where states don't seek excessive power for conquest, but rather sufficient power for their own security, acting primarily when they feel genuinely threatened. Their actions are, I argue, a response to perceived encirclement, not some unprovoked expansionist drive. Around strategic use of proxies like the Houthis and its clear emphasis on asymmetric naval tactics. These are designed, I think, to dilute adversary resolve, complicate their threat calculations, and signal the extremely high cost of sustained maritime operations near Iranian interests. The strategy is about diminishing the likelihood of a direct conventional confrontation, something Iran, given its, let's face it, conventional military inferiority against Western navies, is extremely keen to avoid. Moreover, Iran's pursuit of coastal partnerships, evidenced by things like Memorandum of Understanding with Eritrea and Djibouti, isn't really about territorial control. These seem aimed at establishing forward staging areas for monitoring and rapid response, effectively augmenting Tehran's defensive perimeter far beyond its immediate shores. Their asymmetric naval assets, leveraging surprise, dispersed operations threatening high-value shipping, they cohere with what international relations scholars call the balance of threat concept. It's about shaping adversary perceptions to enhance deterrence without provoking an unwinnable conventional war. Furthermore, Iran's strategic culture, it's deeply characterized by what I describe as opportunistic flexibility and a strong, almost ingrained preference for avoiding open confrontation. We saw this quite clearly with their recent naval withdrawal from the Red Sea, confirmed back in April 2025. Now, this isn't an abdication of influence. It's more of a tactical repositioning, a strategic respite, if you will. It's a calculated move to avoid escalation and preserve their naval forces, especially in the face of overwhelming U.S. military superiority. 2 carrier strike groups, advanced surveillance capabilities, coupled with significant operational costs. This adjustment is entirely consistent with Iran's strategic culture, which prefers operating in the gray zone, that ambiguous space of hybrid tactics, information warfare, proxy engagements to avoid direct open warfare. Even with the visible withdrawal, we see indirect support to proxies through arms transfers and intelligence sharing continuing. Their engagement with countries like Sudan, including providing military drones for a foothold, also persists. All of this, I think, points towards maintaining strategic ambiguity and ensuring long-term freedom of action, patiently waiting for more favorable conditions to reassert their influence indirectly.
Okay, I appreciate you framing Iran's actions through that lens of defensive realism and opportunistic flexibility. But I do find that hard to reconcile with the specific nature of Iran's naval development. You emphasize deterrence, but when we look at capabilities like those advanced modular ASBMs, the sophisticated cruise missiles, the Shahed drones, and particularly this ability to launch ballistic missiles from converted vessels like the Shahed Madavi, isn't that a clear design for offensive power projection rather than simply, waiting for better conditions or deterring an attack? The capacity to potentially sink large warships, a capability Iran is very clearly developing, seems to signify a strategic shift beyond mere deterrence. It feels like it's about establishing the ability to directly challenge and perhaps control maritime spaces. Iran's clear ambition to view Bab-el-Mandeb as its second Strait of Hormuz allows it to disrupt global navigation seemingly at will. That feels like a tool of imposing its will, not just protecting its borders. How does a purely defensive posture require the ability to cripple global shipping on demand?
That's a fair point regarding the capabilities, and I agree, those assets represent a significant threat. However, I still believe the intent behind developing them is crucial, and it remains primarily defensive in its core motivation. Iran's development of these relatively low-cost, mass-produced asymmetric weapons is, I think, a necessary, albeit concerning response to its undeniable conventional military inferiority against major Western navies. Their aim isn't necessarily outright conquest of maritime territory, but to make any military intervention or sustained hostile presence in their vicinity prohibitively costly for adversaries. That's really the essence of deterrence for a comparatively weaker power. If they possessed a truly offensive, hegemonic agenda driving this, we'd likely see more consistent attempts to actually sink vessels, wouldn't we? But the fact is, most Houthi attacks on merchant ships, while disruptive and impactful, haven't resulted in widespread sinkings. These feel like calibrated threats designed to achieve political leverage and security goals by demonstrating capability, not necessarily to dominate by brute force. They want to prevent attacks on themselves, not launch invasions. Doesn't the very cost-effectiveness and the mass production nature you mentioned suggest a strategy of saturation to deny access, rather than precision strikes for offensive control?
I hear your point on making intervention costly, but let's circle back to how Iran achieves that, especially through proxies. You frame Houthi operations as threat mitigation, but I see them as, well, instrumental in extending Iran's control and influence for broader regional dominance. Iran's active support for the Houthis, including intelligence, reportedly from spy ships like the MV Beheshad, and providing advanced weaponry, enables them to exert immense pressure on Western powers and, crucially, to circumvent sanctions by directly impacting global trade. This isn't merely about strategic depth in a defensive sense. It feels like it's about escalating the shadow war with Israel and demonstrating Iran's undeniable ability to destabilize vital international shipping lanes. We're seeing real economic consequences for international trade, not just regional players. If the Houthis are merely a defensive tool, why are their operations so consistently targeting international shipping routes rather than, say, focusing purely on internal Yemeni security concerns or defensive postures against direct Saudi incursions? The impact is global, not just aimed at regional deterrence.
Right. I understand the perception of global impact, but I just don't buy that their primary function is geared towards achieving regional dominance. Houthi operations, undeniably enabled by Iranian support, are functioning, I believe, as a crucial element of Iran's broader threat mitigation strategy. They are a response, a pushback, to what Iran perceives as external encirclement by a hostile coalition, including Riyadh, Washington, and Jerusalem. These actions certainly extend Iran's strategic depth by creating leverage and complicating adversary planning, but that's fundamentally different from an ambition for direct territorial control or regional hegemony. The current Red Sea crisis, in many ways, seems like an expansion of the broader Iran-Israel conflict simply playing out in a maritime theater.
And consider the broader economic fallout. Regional states like Ethiopia find themselves in a truly precarious economic position due to these trade disruptions, especially as a landlocked state heavily reliant on Djibouti. This highlights perhaps Iran's pragmatic, even desperate response to complex geopolitical pressures, using proxies to create a buffer and leverage, not really for a raw grab for power. They're using a crisis to gain breathing room, not necessarily to take over.
That's an interesting perspective, but I find it difficult to reconcile when we examine Iran's apparent long-term intent in the Red Sea. Your perspective suggests tactical flexibility, but Iran's consistent efforts over time seem to paint a picture of a calculated progression towards lasting regional hegemony. Their past agreements with Eritrea, for instance, or these ongoing discussions we hear about for bases in Sudan, they clearly point to a desire to establish a permanent military presence. Couple this with their strategic interest in African markets, which undoubtedly helps mitigate the effects of international sanctions, and we see what looks like a comprehensive long-term strategy unfolding. Iran is adept at adapting to international dynamics, yes, but consistently using these shadow war tactics as a means to an end, asserting itself as a significant global maritime power. This doesn't feel merely opportunistic, it feels like a determined, calculated progression towards a position of dominance. How do you explain that continuous, persistent effort to secure physical military footholds across the region if the intent is only about flexible, temporary positioning?
That's a very compelling point about the long-term intent and the pursuit of these footholds. However, I'd counter again that Iran's strategic culture is characterized precisely by this opportunistic flexibility, alongside a deep-seated, almost institutional preference for avoiding open, large-scale conventional confrontation. This isn't necessarily a weakness, it's a lesson learned from past conflicts like the Iran-Iraq War, and a pragmatic acknowledgement of their limited conventional capabilities compared to major powers. Their recent naval withdrawal from the Red Sea in the face of that overwhelming U.S. presence and high operational costs is, I think, a prime example. It's not a renunciation of influence, but a strategic adjustment. It's designed to preserve their forces and maintain long-term freedom of action, simply awaiting more favorable conditions, a different geopolitical alignment perhaps, to reassert their influence through indirect means and alliances. Even CENTCOM itself seems to recognize this pattern, often viewing Iran's naval movements as a kind of strategic signal, a structured language aimed at testing red lines and preparing for a return when conditions allow. So this isn't necessarily about immediate hegemony. It's about patient strategic positioning, playing a much longer game in that gray zone until the optimal moment arises, rather than attempting a full frontal assault for dominance now. They're preserving their options, playing the long game.
Okay, well, ultimately, I believe Iran has clearly demonstrated both the strategic intent and the tangible capabilities to challenge existing power structures and project influence far beyond its traditional spheres. The Red Sea is undoubtedly a critical theater where they're actively advancing their geopolitical and economic interests, and their actions, to me, strongly suggest a move toward asserting greater, perhaps even dominant influence.
Conversely, I maintain that Iran's actions in the Red Sea are best understood as a sophisticated, and yes, pragmatic response aimed at ensuring its national security and protecting its vital interests in what is undeniably a highly volatile and often hostile environment. They are leveraging asymmetric means and strategic ambiguity quite effectively to achieve deterrence and maintain their security without provoking an unwinnable direct confrontation.
So, while we both clearly agree on the immense significance of Iran's evolving role in the Red Sea, the fundamental debate truly lies in interpretation. Whether Iran's posture represents an assertive, deliberate quest for regional dominance, or a complex, perhaps even desperate, struggle for security in a perilous landscape.
Absolutely. And understanding this inherent complexity requires us to consider multiple perspectives, especially as the Red Sea continues to be such a critical flashpoint for international relations. There is certainly much more to explore within this material regarding the profound implications for global maritime security and, indeed, regional stability.
Thank you for your time and participation today, and thank you all for listening to The Debate. Please do like, share, and subscribe to the Global WarWatch Network.
We also invite you to share your own thoughts in the comment section below and join us on social media. All the links are provided in the description. Thanks for tuning in.